Welcome to FailCraft, the podcast where we dive into the messy, real side of success and explore how setbacks, failures, and challenges become the stepping stones for growth, clarity, and purpose. I'm your host, Ezekiel Iferia, and today we are joined by Melissa Smith. With degrees from Princeton and Harvard, she spent nearly 2 decades inside organizations trying to solve one problem: why capable people stop performing. She did that work through leadership transitions, organizational change, and large business integrations, discovering that the issue was really a lack of talent. It was the environment that stopped demanding of them. Eventually, she noticed the exact same pattern in high achieving families, kids with supportive parents and every opportunity, and yet struggling to motivate themselves to handle discomfort. That realization became the foundation of generational drive. She's currently finishing her book, Capable and Checked Out, and joins us today to discuss the hidden cost of overhelping, why constant reminders weakens follow through, and how well-meaning parents accidentally reduce their children's independence. So, Melissa, I am honored and excited to welcome you to the show. Thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to welcome you. So let's, dive into it. You spent close to 20 years, diagnosing organizational performance, realizing that when capable teams when they hit a wall, the problem was almost never the people, it was the environment. But translating corporate restructuring principles, into the personal space of parenting is a massive leap. So when you first, started looking closely at high achieving homes around you, but what was the, exact point where you realized the supportive environments, people work so hard to build for their kids are actually the very thing stripping away their drive?
Sure. So the epiphany came for me. So as you mentioned earlier, I spent almost 20 years focused on organizations. How do you get more out of people? How do you make sure they're delivering?
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked at parents, myself included, you know, we're successful because we can figure out what the problem is, get to it early, we're being proactive, all of these things that makes us successful at work. But when we do it at home with our families, we actually are taking away some of those key experiences our kids need in order to build resilience and drive and internal motivation. Because kids need to have opportunities. Like I love the name of your podcast of FailCraft. They have to have these opportunities of, there's not someone who's just going to come rescue you every time something goes sideways. That sometimes you sit with it and you have to figure it out. There was one dad I worked with. He had how old was she? 6-year-old daughter. And the daughter was doing a puzzle. And, there was a moment where she's trying to find a corner piece. He sees it from across the room. I mean, it is bright as day. It's right there. She's struggling. It's not 30 seconds. And he's like, here you go, baby. And he's passing her the piece. And it's just one of those things of like giving our children the opportunity to grow and develop into themselves.
Absolutely. So, in the corporate world, the a lack of friction usually means the system is running smoothly. However, in human development, you argue that keeping friction low, and stepping in early actually crowds it crowds out the internal work kids need to do. For example, you give this example of a parent, handing over the puzzle piece to the 6-year-old kid. So how do parents distinguish between, necessary growth building struggle, and a situation where a child genuinely needs help?
Sure. I think a lot of it is understanding, like, what is your kid's capability? And this will vary based on age because what someone is able to do at 6 years old is very different from 16 years old or 18 years old. So I'll put that lens out there so it modifies as the kid grows. But in general, what you look for is giving them a few moments to sit in it, giving them a chance to figure it out before you jump in and quickly kind of take over. And you gave the example in the corporate setting. It exists there too, where you have leaders that they see their team struggling with something and they jump in, they give them the answer. Or they give them the step-by-step blueprint on how to get from point A to point B versus giving them what the end target is and giving them that opportunity to build it. A huge part that I've seen is confidence plays a huge role. And I say confidence in that both in the work setting and for kids. Within the work settings, if you never have the opportunity to try and your boss has always laid everything out from point A to point Z, then you don't build that confidence. It's all supported. The same thing happens to our kids. If we're helping them, like, that little girl who's doing the puzzle, she's like, yes, we did it. She didn't say I did it because her dad jumped in there and helped out. So confidence comes from living the experience, trying, and it's okay if there's, structured failure or that they don't get it that time. But what that would build is knowing that you can try, you improve, and then you try again. Versus feeling like every time you don't succeed, it's a true failure. Because that kid who's never had that chance to, sometimes fail and know that it's not, I suck as a person or I'm a horrible person, but I'm going to get better and I'll try again, knowing that's the loop. They have more resilience and confidence in themselves.
Absolutely. So, you say that it's okay if there's structured failure, that this is part of the theme of what we talk about on FailCraft, using failures as resilience. Do you think failures, in the developmental stage of kids, in a structured way, do you think it helps them build resilience and actually become high-performing individuals? I'd like to hear your own thoughts on this.
Sure. And I say structured way in which I'm not saying, well, my kid's going to practice crossing a street without you being there. So there's certain instances where you're just like, that's not safe. You know what I mean? There's certain instances where I'm like, no, those are like high impact things that could like completely change their life. But like, no, you need to make sure you're there. So I give that as a caveat when I say structured failures. But it does help them become resilient, to understand that it's not the end of the world, to realize that they are capable of bouncing back and that they can be better on the other side. I'll give example, my son, he decided he wanted to use a Rubik's Cube or learn how to do Rubik's Cube. He sucked at it. I'm just going to be honest. He really sucked at it for a really, really long time. And it was him realizing that though he didn't solve it that day, the next week, the next month, he went a little bit further each and every time. And it was almost redefining what is the win. And it's appreciating the steps you're making on the journey, not just getting to the end goal. Every step is getting you closer to the end goal. So it's not like the end goal doesn't matter. But are you able to, like accept and joy and the success you get along the way of getting a little bit closer? Because I wish I can say life will go exactly how everyone wants it and everyone has like a written plan of what's going to occur, but it's not there. And you don't want it that the first time your kid experiences any adversity is when it's something that's big that really matters to them, or it's a time when you're not even there to help or to talk to them during that time period that they're seeing it for the first time versus you being able to give them the scaffolding along the way so that they're able to go that, it was time for college. It's time for them to leave your home. It's time for them to get their first job or time to get their first apartment. Are they able to actually embrace life?
So, well-meaning parents, they often rely on constant reminders to ensure nothing falls through the cracks for their kids. So does this habit of constantly reminding, does it destroy a child's ability to develop follow through and ownership? I'd like to hear your own opinions on this.
Sure. I would say the big thing it impacts is responsibility and ownership. And I think that's a huge part of developing it as an individual. And it impacts who they define as their sense of self. So if you're the parent and you're telling them for the 20th time, please unload the dishwasher, please unload the dishwasher. After a while, they realize that they don't have to remember this stuff. You or the mom or their dad, you've become the operating system. Think of a computer for the household. And they can just wait for someone to tell them what comes next. And it actually puts extra burden on the moms and the dads because they have both their life. Then there's these other things. And it's kind of like, well, I've been telling them this for like the last 7 years. You would think that they would know that, like, here's the morning routine. Do I really have to walk them through it? We've been doing the same thing for the last 5 years. And it's that they have been taught by us that they don't have to remember it because someone else is going to come in to the rescue. And at the same time, they're not feeling like they have to be accountable or responsible. And there's always someone to, swoop in and save the day, so that there's almost a dependence on it, versus realizing that I am, like I said earlier about like their sense of identity. Are they developing a personality and a proof of self that I'm dependable, I'm reliable, I'm someone people can count on? They're not developing that. It's more, I can follow the orders my parents give me. And at one point, they're going to have to be on their own and you won't be there. What happens then?
So what about parents who actually what about for kids who don't remember the things they are supposed to do? So sometimes you have to actually let them know that the things they ought to do. What if they keep forgetting? So how do we tackle that issue without actually constantly reminding them of it? In such a way that it now becomes a burden for the parents to constantly remind the kids for the same thing over the span of years.
It's the, how do you transfer the responsibility from your plate to where it belongs?
Yep.
And the responsibility that moves will vary by age. What you give to, I have 3 kids, a 6, 10, and 12. My expectations for my 12-year-old is really different than my 6-year-old. Where I'm like, yay, you got dressed for the 6-year-old. For the 12-year-old, I'm like, wait, did you unload the dishwasher? Like, what have you done? A huge part that's there is, how do you transfer the responsibility? So it's not, and I'll use laundry as an example. We feel like we're transferred when we say something like, do the laundry. But many times, though they might have done it for like the last 5 years straight of you walking through every step, they weren't really paying attention and they don't know what the definition of done means to you. So they'll stop a step short. And then you're stuck as a parent jumping in on like, well, they folded the clothes, but they didn't put the clothes away. Or they didn't put it in the right drawer. Or they didn't, you know what I mean? Like they put the clothes in the dryer, but they didn't turn the dryer on. And so when I think about like the first time you transfer it over to them, it's going through it of providing the key details. Like, when do you expect it to be done? Like, by before bedtime or before dinner time, I expect that, the clothes that are from the washing machines are going in the dryer and the dryer is turned on. So like giving the actual concrete details of what they need to do. And so that they understand like, what does done mean? So I will tell my kids all the time, done means the clothes are folded and put in the correct drawers. It's not folded, left on the couch. It's not left inside the dryer. There's lots of variations I've seen. It's not folded in a basket, sitting somewhere in a corner. Like I've seen very different variations of it. And other thing that I found helpful, and you mentioned like, how does a kid keep all of this in their head? It's providing them with the tools and giving them suggestions that could help them to be able to own it. So one I gave my son is, make a list of what you need to get done. Back in the day, I used to make the list for him. Now I don't, because I'm still owning it if I'm making the list. And I'll give you the items that's a part of your daily thing, but you need to have your daily checklist. That will help you to, follow through, because when they're in school and they're getting assignments, we're not there. They're going to have to pull out the paper and do it themselves and break down the task that's needed of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was very insightful. So Melissa, does the act of removing discomfort before it becomes a problem, does it accidentally signal to a child, that they aren't really capable of handling failure themselves? And what's the effect of that?
Yeah, so the effect of it is action speaks louder than words. So when you're removing the tension or discomfort, they're either hearing that, one, I'm not trusted to do it, and I'm not capable. And so they're just like, this is not for me and I'm going to have failure on the other end. Or two, they're hearing that I need help. I'm, beyond not being trusted, I'm incapable of doing it. And so they're not building that internal grounding for themselves that when bigger things come up, that they can achieve it. I'll use an example as a woman I work with. She had a daughter who was around 13 years old, and they were going through this whole thing on, she was trying to pick a school for where does she want to go to next. I think it was like the middle school, etc. And the daughter didn't feel comfortable going to her mom to talk about like, what the different options were. And a lot of it came from, and a lot of the insecurities the daughter felt was because she never really had to make major choices in her life. Her parents did absolutely everything, pick the outfits, pick the clothes, pick the shoes. And it wasn't even like, here's 3 choices, pick between them. It was always like everything was just a clearly laid out game plan. And it was the first time that she had a choice that, she could pick between, going to a charter school versus going to a public school. And they wanted her insight. And she was incapable of giving an answer because she didn't even know what she liked, because she never defined her sense of self, because there was always a roadmap created by someone else that was placed on her. So I would say having your kids feel the discomfort, having them try out what the small things, because the younger you start, the smaller the items you can experiment with them, helps them build into just capable young adults and adults who can thrive.
So, for a kid who grew up, maybe probably because of being too comfortable, being, handed things like that without actually going through the, you know, structured failures or discomfort. And now they have this internal critic that they are not trusted for this, they are incapable. So how do they, correct that? How do they fight off that internal critic and see themselves for who they truly are?
It starts with handing something over to them. And you can't hand over everything. So you can't say they didn't do anything for you've modeled out and you've controlled every single aspect of their day. You can't say, well, starting tomorrow, you're now going to own everything. No, do not do that. That will set your kid up not for success. Instead, you pick one item that your kid is capable of handling and you pass it over to them. And if it's a sense of identity issue, that's when you start to ask the questions of what do they like? If they have, like, one thing I've seen, like, kids have so many things on their schedules and so many different activities and events, etc. If you were to drop one item, what would they put in its place? Of like trying to figure out, what's their preference, not just what we want for them. Of like, you have to do piano lessons and you need to do chat. Like, no, what would they want to do? And it gives them some autonomy with their own lives.
So, for the parents, listening, who actually realize that they've been doing way too much for their capable child, and they actually want to step back a bit, but now they are afraid, or they don't want to actually watch their kid fail a test or miss a deadline because they are not reminded. So what's, the actionable step they can actually take to rebuild the child's independence?
Sure. It's a part that I had of just stepping back, but start smaller than you thought you would. So it might not be handing everything over at once. I'll use the example you just gave of, not wanting your child to fail a test. So maybe it turns into, I'm not going to remind you if your homework is packed in your book bag. And you have to accept for maybe a week straight, they might not be getting the best grades on their homework assignment for that week. But just giving them, starting smaller. So not saying like you have an SAT or a huge exam that's coming up that will define, what college or university they'll get into. That might not be the area that you want to start with. Start smaller.
Yeah.
And think about what is the ramification if they don't follow through. The other thing you could do is you could start with things that are within your household. So giving them responsibility for taking out the trash or doing the laundry or helping with the dishes or helping their sibling, so that if there's a failure point, you're well aware of what it is, but you could also control the damage that's done. Unloading the dishwasher. If you don't do it, then we don't have dishes for the next morning for breakfast. And someone's stuck washing the dishes in the morning, preferably your kid who didn't load the dishwasher. But you can control the consequence that's there versus, something that if they miss it, it could have a lifetime impact on them.
Absolutely insightful. And I hope it helps that parent in a position where they want to pull back, some of they want their child to be independent and build resilience and become high performers, and want to stop over supporting or over reminding them. So thank you for sharing that, Melissa. So let's talk about your upcoming book, Capable and Checked Out. So tell us about this. What gave you the motivation to write this book, and what's it about? The general content.
So my motivation for writing it was I've always been passionate. I'm the mom of 3, and I saw it happen over and over again where I'm first generation American. And you would see people who just came into the country or they're first generation, they have this drive, this determination. You have no choice but to be successful. But by the second or third generation, you see like that hunger just decrease versus what you had. And I looked at my own kids and I'm just like, there is no way in the world this would ever happen when I was a kid. And I was wondering, I was like, and you hear these stories over and over again. And that's why my company is called Generational Drive. And it's how do you make sure the drive persists from one generation to the next and use that married together with just my background within corporate America and change management and working with people on how do you create frameworks to both diagnose and understand what's pulling drive and internal motivation down and leveraging just multiple theories that's out there. But then how do you make it tangible for what parents can do right now? What can they change? Like, put down the book when it's done. You have a running list of these are the 4 things I'm going to change. Talk to my partner about it. These are the 4 things that I'm going to do that's going to make a change for my child. And then also wanting to make sure that, everyone reverts every so often. Like, what do you do then? How do you have the talk tracks for when your kid's just like, why are you changing? Because, they'll always have things to say. Like, what do you say when some of the key things might come out of their mouths? And you're just like, okay, the answer is not because I said so. Like, what do I say that will move this forward and make it stick? And now is a big part of providing the tools. And then how do you make it stick? And so those were kind of the 2 catalysts that I had as something I was passionate about, something that, had pilot groups with different parents where I went through the entire process with them to optimize it further of kind of just bringing that to life of something that I can share with other parents.
All right. All right. So, for the listeners and in our audience who are actually ready to understand what's, driving the behaviors in their home and, they want to go take the generational drive diagnostic, they want to, go pre-order or learn more about your upcoming book or just get to connect with you to have a conversation. So where is the best place for them to find you, Melissa?
Sure. If they go to my website, www.generationaldrive.com, they would have access to a diagnostic. So it's a free diagnostic that will actually provide you customized feedback to your home. I also have free consultation, just kind of clarity sessions for parents, so 20 minutes to kind of talk through what they're going through. And it's also deep dive strategy sessions, if that's something someone wants to pursue, that are all options that you can connect to me to talk about right from the website. So it's generationaldrive.com, GENERATIONAL. I know it's kind of long, DRIVE.com.
All right. I'll be sure to have that linked in the show notes. So for the listeners, you can scroll down and you'll find it and go check it out. And that's Melissa. It has been a truly insightful and an amazing time, having this conversation with you here today. And I'm truly honored to have you on FailCraft. Once again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Melissa.